Hey guys, this is Rob from Wax of This Music, and welcome to today's episode, which is episode 1 of a new series that I'm doing called The Tracks of My Years, or The Wax of My Years. This is going to be a 10-part series, stroke podcast, stroke vlog, whatever you want to call it, of me playing records and discussing records that had a huge influence on my DJing style, my record collecting in general, and my music production techniques and styles. Basically, I'm going to go from 1989 to 1999 because those 10 years are the most important for me as in development as a musician and a record producer, DJ and all that. They were the heyday. That was my heyday. So I'm going to select a handful of records from there and, going back right to my teenage years and then right up until, I had a hit record at the end of the century. So it was like a whole build-up of that, thing for me. I'm going to select 8 records per episode, roughly. And these are not going to be the best records of that year. They're going to be the records for me that, I remember from each of those years. And I'm going to discuss little stories with each record, maybe, it depending on what record it is. When I first heard it and the impact it had on the dance floor and so on and so on. And little anecdotes and little stories that go with those records to make it, bring alive that social history. Anyway, so the first 8 records are from 1989. And I was 13 years old, so I was obviously too young for the Hacienda and Sunrise and all that kind of thing that was going off across the country. But nevertheless, it still had an impact on me through pirate radio, Top of the Pops, Smash Hits, The Enemy, which I read every week because my dad bought it religiously. So, these names of these bands and all these things would crop up all the time. And obviously when a dance act got a hit record, they would get coverage and on the chart show or Top of the Pops or whatever, so you would see that music, and by 89, house was really starting to become, an accepted genre in the pop charts quite evidently, basically, also, during that period, I was still into hip hop. I was into LL Cool J and Public Enemy and Run DMC and those kind of people, but house music and techno and rave and all that, whatever you call it, was coming through en masse at this point now for me. So I've picked 8 records and I'm just going to play them. I'm going to needle drop them and I'm going to, talk about them and stuff. And the first one is the Happy Mondays and Wrote for Luck. And the first time I ever heard of the Happy Mondays properly was when they did a joint performance on Top of the Pops with the Stone Roses. It was around 89. And I can remember watching it and my mum coming and going, "What's this rubbish?" As parents do. And I can remember just watching it and going, I was like mesmerised by them. I was like, no, this is different, Anyway, this is Wrote for Luck, the Vince Clarke remix. Now, the Vince Clarke is the Vince Clarke from Erasure, Depeche Mode, Yazoo, that guy. And he's done a really simple, stripped back, straightforward, like housey, sort of acidy kind of indie rock dance track. And it's brilliant. And this is probably the most famous version of this track. And probably a lot of people don't realise it's Vince Clarke that's done this mix. Anyway, it came out on Factory Records, and obviously everybody knows Factory Records were infamous for not paying their artists, and the Mondays were probably one of those bands that missed out on a fortune. So I'm going to play the Vince Clarke remix now, and this is probably one of those tracks, that I absolutely adore by the band. I love Step On and I love Loose Fit and all that, but this one's probably the coolest one I think they ever did. And here it goes. Wrote for Luck, Happy Mondays. One of those records that is just like it's so chilled out, but at the same time it's got that real upbeat as well. It makes you want to dance, and also it's something you can listen to while you're chilling out. It's just one of those great classic indie dance crossover records, where guitar met synthesizer, so to speak, in a dancey sort of way. And the Mondays were those that pioneered that sort of sound, along in the late 80s, with the acid house boom. And it was one of those songs that, you could perform in a concert hall or in a club. It had that crossover effect. And so that's that. So that was the Vince Clarke remix of Wrote for Luck by the Mondays. And I'm just going to pop that in there now. Next up is a record that is also is a Balearic, is the ultimate Balearic anthem, I suppose, Balearic classic, and that's Sueno Latino, the Latin Dream. Now this record came out and it was 10.5 minutes long, which is, obviously an epic in terms of dance music. I suppose in those days, tracks were quite short normally. And it's a sample that's taken from the Manuel Gottsching record, E2, E4, which came out in the early 80s, I think. I'm not so sure. You'll have to check that. But it's that sample, that hypnotic little sample that you hear. And then they put on the sound effects of the tropical bird and the vocal, which is really, erotic sort of, sexual sort of vocal. And this came out on BCM Records, which was a famous European label at that time. And they had quite a few successful records coming out of that period. And this track is just mesmerising. It's probably one of the great early sort of trance records, I suppose, even though it's Balearic. But yeah, it's a phenomenal, dreamy track. And you can imagine listening to this, watching the sun go up, or go down, should I say, in Ibiza back in those days. It's just something that I've always looked for in music, is that kind of dreamy sort of journey sort of stuff, that music that takes you on a journey. It's I could listen to this over and over and never tire of it, But just the way it kicks in, once that beat starts and once that little bass line starts, it really, and the piano drop is timeless. There's a record that I keep meaning to pick the original up off, the Manuel Gottsching version. I just never get around to getting a copy. And you can listen to that on YouTube if you're not familiar with it, and just listen to the sample where it came from. There was also the Derek May remix that came out in '92, which is also one of my favourites. Hugely influential record for me, that was. And I'll probably play that in the '92 episode that I do. And it was a record that took me about 2 years to get hold of at the time. I heard it on a mixtape and then couldn't get hold of it, and then in the days before the internet, and finally I picked it up somewhere, and I can't think where I got it from, but I think I got it from mail order somewhere through Record Collector magazine, which was a fortunate thing then, because that was only mainly rock and pop, and I picked it up through there anyway. Those pianos. So yeah, that's Sueno Latino, the Latin Dream. And on the flip side is just a Cutmaster G remix, which is a little bit more techno-y, a little bit more breakbeat sort of influential. It's got a little breakbeat in there. A bit more harder edged. Your little breakbeat sort of thing, and it's got the acapella at the end, which you could sample or drop onto another record. So there you go, that's Sueno Latino on BCM. And next up is Richie Rich and Salsa House on FFRR Records, the classic record by Richie Rich, which is a really unusual record for the time, because it's moody, it's funky, it's hard edged, it's scatty, it's just got everything in it that you wouldn't expect at that time. I think it was way ahead of its time, this record. I think this is a good 2 or 3 years ahead of its time. It's wishy-washy sort of pads that come throughout, and that real cool little salsa piano that you get. And this little bit here. Again, one of those really moody records that, you know, takes you on a little bit of a journey, but is also funky and you know, makes you want to get up and dance as well. But you can listen to it lying down at home, you know. So that was that, and then you had another version here, which is a little bit more clubby. And then on the flip side, you've got a Orbital remix, which was it's called the Orbital remix, remixed by Jazzy M, who had various tracks out over the years. He did all sorts of tracks like Zuki and the one he did for Perfecto as well later on in the late 90s, early 2000s. And this is a little bit more ravey, a little bit more, you know. More dubby. So that was that one. So that was Richie Rich and Salsa House. And on that one. And then next up, we've got probably one of the greatest, probably one of the finest written love songs in house music of all time. And that is That's the Way Love Is by 10 City, Byron Stingley. And this track is really kind of a big contrast, because the version that I really like is the acid mix. Now this is kind of like a really uplifting acid track produced by Marshall Jefferson. No one finer to do such a mix. And Marshall Jefferson would make, when he would make tracks, he would always put in 100%. He wouldn't just do a little bedroom studio track. He went to town and he did, you know, full arrangements and proper studios, and he would use as much live instrumentation as he could. But with this, he did this acid mix, which is a uplifting track, but the lyrics are really, you know, depressing and sad, I suppose. But yeah, this track, I used to play this in my when I used to do downstairs sets in a chill out room at a venue called Venue 44 in Mansfield back in the early to mid 90s, and I would play this quite often. It was just one of those tracks that just hits you straight away with that really thick acid, and then the pitched up vocal, which was used to great effect. And it still sounds fresh today. It doesn't sound dated like most tracks do. You know, that had the sampled vocals, where they pitched up the vocal, and they sound dated now, but this still sounds fresh. Byron Stingley's Get Up Everybody and those tracks he had out in the mid-90s on Manifesto Records. Well, this is where he began with the band 10 City.
To
yeah, it's one of those tracks that's got a really uplifting vibe, production-wise, but the lyrics are really sad. But it's got a great acid line in there, so it's fantastic. And then the flip side, which is the underground extended version, is a more of a disco sort of pop-funk record, and there's a lot of uplifting strings and stuff. Again, a contrast to the lyrics, I suppose. That funky sort of wah-wah guitar and... And then the funny thing is about this release is they've put on the a cappella for Devotion, the band's other successful record, or one of their other successful records. And it's weird because the record label put an a cappella for a different track on the single of That's the Way Love Is. And had they not done this, I'm assuming that the hit single by Nomad, I Want to Give You Devotion, that came out a year later, probably would never have happened if they'd not got the sample of the a cappella from this. I give devotion, you devotion. Oh, yeah. One of those hooks. So yeah, the Nomad sampled that a year later and had a big hit record with that in 1990. So little things like that record labels did, probably accidental or what, you know, that created another hit record. It's one of those things you don't hear of anymore. So that was 10 City, and That's the Way Love Is. And next up, keeping in that kind of acidy sort of vibe, is probably a record that really pushed boundaries. And this record, first time I heard this, I was skiving school with some other friends at someone's house, and this girl had it, and she was older than us, and she put it on the hi-fi, and it had just been banned by the BBC for its erotic vocals that break down. The BBC wouldn't touch it. And it was number 2 in the UK charts, so it was a high flyer. And we can remember hearing it and going, what the hell's that? Something that we'd not heard before, And I can remember hearing this record for the first time, whilst I should have been at school. And this is French Kiss by Little Louie. And if you play this now, it just instantly still has that proper, impact. It just goes straight into the point. And its kick drum is brilliant for the time, because a lot of kick drums from that era, in that era sound like little, sound really flat and don't have that impact. Whereas this, 31 years later, still has, it has that. It could fill a dance floor still to this day. It hasn't aged at all. It's aged brilliantly. It's just really hypnotic, and it just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going until it just automatically, suddenly, just slows down. And this is where the BBC banned it, because of this bit. And then it slows down, builds back up. And it's just still one of them very exciting records that after 31 years, it still stands the test of time. Even, when you listen to other records produced at that time, they just sound dated. Even Strings of Life by Rhythm is Rhythm, it sounds dated, but that doesn't. So yeah, Little Louie, French Kiss on FFR Records. And one of the first dance records, probably the first dance record, I suppose, to get banned on radio. So that was that. Next up then is a record that is completely different to the rest. This is a real proper floor filler, and it's the Mixmaster and Grand Piano Groove, and this is a great uplifting piano track, and it's just full of samples that are really famous now. Every vocal sample you hear in this, you'll know it. And they've been sampled time and time again. You've got Letta Holloway in there, and and this is just a great piano hook. It's a proper uplifting track, and this is one of the finest records. It's almost like a really cool Jive Bunny record, and it's just full of samples, but it's great.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Hold up. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Hold up. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Tell us, what do you think about the women's liberation? I got you.
It's such a good vibration.
Hold up. I got you.
It's such a good vibration.
Down me.
It's such a good vibration.
See what I mean by all the samples? Just one after the other.
Wait a minute.
But it's got such an infectious piano lick. You know, the B-sides are no good. But yeah, that is sort of one of those records you heard on the Hitman and Her late at night. And that was another show that, you know, kids and teenagers that couldn't go clubbing would watch that and go, wow, I want to do that. You know, even though the clubs were probably horrendous. You know, but still, that's the Mixmaster and the grand piano, which came out on BCM Records as well, and so did this one, which is another uplifting Sunshine Piano House classic. And this is The Real Wild House by Raul Arellano, again on BCM Records. And this guy was a DJ from Spain. And this record is just, I used to play this in my chill out sets. I say chill out, like in the back room sets I used to do a lot of. And I've done countless club classic nights over the years. And I always still play this, you know, where I can, where it fits. And it's just an instant great track. And it samples the vocal from Iggy Pop's Real Wild one, which came out in the Iggy Pop's 80s period. And it's just a brilliant hands in the air sort of track.
¿Ustedes han visto a un gitano que quiere ir a la luna? ¿Ustedes han visto?
1, 2, 3, 4.
It's got a great like Spanish, you know, flamenco guitar in there and real uplifting pads. And this is where the vocal sample comes from Iggy Pop.
I'm a real wild one.
And you have to wonder what happens to like labels like BCM that had a huge string of releases and then they just fade away into obscurity, or they end up selling the rights to a bigger distributor. A lot of labels end up like that, which is interesting, how they just don't keep going, but some do. So yeah, that was Raul Arellano and The Real Wild House on BCM Records. And last but not least, we're going to pick away at the best record, in my opinion, that ever came out. Not just in '89, but over the last 30 odd years of dance music. For me, this record just says it all. You know, it's got the pads, it's got the beats, it's got the acid, it's got the jazz influence with the lead line. It's got everything you need in it. And it is Pacific by 808 State. Now, this is the original promo version. There's several mixes and various releases that came out on Tommy Boy and on the UK label, I think ZTT, which this is from. But this is the original promo, and I picked this up off a friend of mine who was a friend of my dad's, who was a nightclub owner and a DJ, and he worked for record labels over the years through the 70s and 80s. and he had pretty much every single record that was ever put out on promo sent to him over the course of the whole of the 1980s and early 90s and stuff. And he never sold any, he never got rid of any, and he just hoarded them for years. And then by the mid 90s, he'd had enough and he wanted to get rid. So he let me, one of the few people around, to have first dibs and, you know, take a load of records and buy them. And there were just all these unplayed promos, mint condition. And it was like, God, I'll have that. And they were like £1 each, you know, it was ridiculous. Some of them really rare now. And this was one of them. And I already had this on a 7-inch, but it wasn't good enough. You know, I had it on a 7-inch from when I was about 13 when it came out. But to get the original promo during that time, I was like, oh, yes. And so I picked this up, and this version, there's several versions, as I say, but the one version is the main version. And the club I used to work for, Progress, in late 93, summer 93, late 93, when I first started working there, Russell, the promoter and the DJ of the club, would play this at the end of the night. It's usually was probably his last track of the night, and the whole place would just erupt. Even though the record was 4 years old by then, and there was so much more dance music had been, the rave scene had been by then, but this still has that impact. And even now, after 31 years, it still has that initial impact. You know, it will never change. It's just. And there was also a version by Doc Scott, who did a rave version called the Surgery EP, the NHS EP, on Simon Baseline Smith's Absolute 2 label, which was another local label in Derby, where I'm from. But this is just a timeless piece of music. So that's it for this episode. That is probably, you know, a good way to start. It would be to go back to 89 and pick away the 8 important records for me from that period. As I say, this is not a best of. It's a collection of tracks that are important to me and that you know, the favourite ones for me. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And next time it's going to be 1990, and we're going to have a variety of tracks from that period in the next video. And hopefully you'll join me there. Thank you very much, and goodbye.